toutes et tous. Merci d'être venus si nombreuses, nombreux cet après-midi pour cette rencontre avec Jérémy Deller. Je suis Sophie Kaplan, je suis la directrice de la Criée, co-commissaire de l'exposition avec Jean Bouillet et Claire Lignereux du Musée des beaux-arts et Étienne Bernard du Frac Bretagne. Et nous sommes ravis de mener cette conversation avec Jérémy cet après-midi. Comment ça va se passer? Ça va bien se passer. Non, il y a plusieurs temps dans cette rencontre. Je vais d'abord poser quelques questions à Jérémy et ensuite il y aura un temps d'échange avec la salle où vous pourrez poser les questions aussi à Jérémy. Et suite à cette rencontre, il y a ce magnifique livre qui est le meilleur livre de Jérémy Deller. Oui, c'est vrai, c'est écrit. Qui est en vente dans les sources qui sont notre petit espace librairie documentation et que Jérémy se fera un immense plaisir de signer si vous avez envie qu'il le signe. Voilà. Je vais quand même si tout le monde connaît peut-être Jérémy, le présenter. Jérémy Deller est un artiste anglais né à la fin des années 60 qui s'intéresse aux cultures populaires et aux contre-cultures, pour qui les questions sociales, l'histoire, mais aussi la musique sont au centre. Voilà. Jérémy a notamment été lauréat du Turner Prize en 2003. Il a représenté la Grande-Bretagne à la Biennale de Venise en 2013. Et certaines d'entre vous se souviennent peut-être de son expo Folk Archive au Palais de Tokyo en 2009, je crois, qui a été un grand moment, en tout cas pour le public français. Voilà, je vais commencer les questions. Jérémy va parler en anglais et donc vous avez ceux d'entre vous qui ont des casques, il vous suffit de mettre les casques pour entendre Jérémy parler en français avec une voix de femme. J'en profite pour vous remercier, madame. On va commencer par la première question, c'est là où nous sommes, c'est-à-dire au milieu de l'ensemble Warning Graphic Content. Qui présente une large sélection de ton travail autour d'affiches et d'imprimés. Ce travail a été souvent pensé pour l'espace public, c'est-à-dire que pour que l'art soit montré en dehors des murs blancs du musée et de la galerie, mais aussi pour qu'il soit accessible à toutes et à tous. Je te cite: « J'aime faire cadeau de mes œuvres au public, car cela va à l'encontre de l'idée dominante qui veut que l'art soit onéreux et réservé à une certaine élite. » Donc ma question, Jérémy. Oui. Pourquoi est-ce si important pour toi que l'art prenne place partout et via de multiples formes?
Bonjour. I'm going to stand up. Because you can't, I'm very short anyway, so you should be able to see me. But thank you for the introduction. It's always like having your obituary read to you when you do talks like this. So, but I like to hear sometimes my obituary. But also, you're in this room today, it's this exhibition, and I was thinking today that it's a little bit like when you go to a boring church service and you can look at the art or the sculptures or the architecture of the church. So if this talk bores you a little, I hope it doesn't, you can look at some of the work on the walls. But to answer your question, I always like encountering art in public. A lot of this work was made for the public space. It was made for either metro stations or the street. And for me, as an artist, there's nothing quite like seeing a work in the street. It really is. I'm not a street artist. I'm not that kind of artist, because that means something totally different. But I like seeing my works on the street. It makes it real. you can see your work on a phone or reproduced on a phone. It's kind of meaningless in a way until you see it on the street and you see people around it and you see a context for it. So for me, I love to be in public. I mean, I grew up, I don't like, the elitism of art is something that doesn't interest me, even though I grew up in a kind of semi-elite background that I have. I studied art history, I didn't study art, but in a sense, I love seeing work in the open and encountering it there, the kind of random quality of it. That's what I love.
Okay. Second question, la musique occupe une place centrale dans ton travail. Comment la musique nourrit ton travail? Et tu as écrit dans le catalogue qu'elle est une fenêtre sur le monde pour toi. En quoi? Et est-ce que tu peux nous donner quelques exemples d'œuvres qui sont nourries par ta relation à la musique? Please.
Oui. Well, music for me, growing up in the UK, music was really, for me personally, the dominant culture. I grew up at a time before internet, and so popular music was your way of interpreting the world. Now you just go online and look at something online, but then I got all my information about the world through TV, but also through watching music and watching musicians and seeing how they performed. So it's the way that I interpreted the world. I'm talking about now, age of like 5 or 6 or 7. Some of my very strong memories of seeing glam rock effectively on TV, people like David Bowie on TV. So for me, music has always been a way to interpret the world. And so I bring that into my work. Unfortunately, there's a work here, but it's obscured by a speaker, which gives that impression, really. It's a work related to when I got a brass band to play acid house music. And it really shows, it's a mind map, but it's also about history and about how music is an integral part of history. It's a part of social history, but also it moves history forward. It moves culture forward at certain times. And there's a quote by a French philosopher, theorist called Jacques Attali, which is "Music is prophecy," which I think is, I wish I'd thought of that phrase because it's an amazing phrase, and for me, it's exactly what music is. It shows us a potential future, maybe an ideal future as well, but it's ahead of society often, what changes in music and what people look like and what they're saying and how they behave. So for me, it's very important. And that definitely happened in rave culture in Britain. If you go to the Frac, there's 2 films I have there. One is about rave in Britain in the 80s and how it relates to politics at the time. And there's another film about Depeche Mode fans around the world, which has a very strong emphasis on Eastern Europe and Russia and how big Depeche Mode were in Russia in the 80s and through the early 90s and still are. And it's about how maybe culture and music helped end the Cold War. Okay?
I think.
Bon.
I think that tout le monde, vous gardez vos questions si vous voulez des précisions pour après. Sauf si quelqu'un a très très envie de poser une question maintenant, vous pouvez lever la main et on vous apportera un micro. Next question. Toujours dans le catalogue, du coup je pose des questions qui sont, parce que j'ai été assez passionnée par la lecture de ce catalogue qui a été largement écrit par Jérémy Deller lui-même. Il y a un entretien avec Alan Kane, qui est l'artiste avec lequel tu as fait Folk Archive, que vous pouvez aller voir au Frac. Tu dis, Warhol a dit que le pop art consistait à aimer les choses. Moi, je dis que l'art populaire consiste à les adorer. J'aime beaucoup cette phrase. Est-ce que tu peux expliquer ce que tu entends par là et en quoi l'art, par ailleurs, what does it mean, la différence entre aimer et adorer, oui. Et en quoi l'art populaire est central in your work?
I like the quote by Warhol a lot, but I think that when I used it, I think folk art is an expression, often is an expression of love for something, for culture, or there's a lot of love in the making of objects, because often with folk art, not always, but sometimes you spend so much time making the work, but often it doesn't have the value maybe of the labor that's been put in. So that's interesting, I think. In Britain, folk art until quite recently, for most of the sort of post-war 20th century, had a very bad public recognition. And when we made that exhibition, we wanted it to highlight the things that we really loved and how inspirational folk art is onto artists. Artists take a lot from folk art. And when I say folk art, I mean in the sort of widest sense, including contemporary production as well, like tattoos, all those things that we think of as creative, even cooking and flower arranging, all those things that we saw as part of a folk tradition. So with that show, people who make things because they love doing the thing. They don't have to do the thing, they don't make money doing the thing, but they have a love and a joy in making things. That was important to us, and that's shown in the work.
Okay. Maybe you can, it's not,
yeah.
It's an additional question, but oui. I will be curious to hear how do you make this collection? Maybe you can you explained that last day, and that's very interesting, that the way you went with Alan through England to find things.
You're giving my answer away, yeah. We basically, if you've not seen the show, it's a big show of photographs and film from all around the UK, of objects and of events, often things that can't be seen in a gallery because they're ephemeral or they're too big or they are performance-based. So it's really a document of, as we see it, cultural production that we really loved, which is some of it's very traditional, some of it's very new, like I said. And we basically went on a journey around Britain, literally. It was pre-YouTube, pre-image search. So you had to actually be in the real world to find things. You go online and try to find things, but it's actually very difficult. People are still using telephones and landlines, if you remember those. And some people didn't have email addresses. So we basically got in a car, drove to an event, and on the way we became distracted and we went to other events. And so it was a very random process of collecting and documenting things. Now, if you did this exhibition you'll see at the Frac, you could make that exhibition in 2 days online. You could just go online and take videos, and then you could edit them and say they're your own or whatever, and images as well. But then 20 years ago, it was a process of really traveling and meeting people, which was very exciting for us. And that's basically what we did. We're very much, as we say in Britain, we're following our noses.
Toujours pour Folk Archive, tu as collecté des objets et des œuvres qui ont été réalisées par d'autres qu'avec Alan Kane, vous avez rassemblés dans une exposition qui est aussi une œuvre à part entière. Cette façon d'inviter d'autres personnes à prendre part à ton travail est récurrente. Par exemple, on peut voir au musée pour l'ensemble Adrian Street, la peinture murale a été réalisée par un peintre qui s'appelle, un street artiste qui s'appelle Aéro. En quoi est-ce important pour toi d'inclure d'autres personnes ou d'autres œuvres dans ton œuvre?
Well, I didn't study art. I studied art history. I don't have any technical capabilities. I don't have any traditional talent in art. So if I need something painted or made, I have to ask someone. And sometimes I have I have relationships with these people in the sense that I work with them again and again. So in beaux-arts and Frac, you see a lot of banners, trade union banners made by one person. There's not many people now in the UK that make banners like that. And he's one of the last people, in a sense, or one of the few people. So often I need people to help me, which is traditional. That's what artists do a lot of the time. They have studio assistants. But with, for example, the painting of Adrian Street, every time I show that video anywhere in the world, I try and get someone local to make a painting around the film. It's on a TV screen, and it basically is a different way of presenting video. It's not just a blank, a video on a wall. It's something that has a fantastical element to it. because Adrian's life, if you've seen the film, cannot be contained on a TV. It's a fantasy life. It's an epic life, mythic almost. And so he deserves to have a painting around it. Okay. And what's nice is that every time you go to a different country, you get a different interpretation of the film by usually a younger artist, and I like that. Keeps it fresh for me, keeps it interesting for me.
Ouais. Dans la majorité de tes films, ce ne sont pas seulement des œuvres d'autres que tu intègres, mais aussi les personnes elles-mêmes. Parfois, ce sont des acteurs professionnels, très souvent des amateurs, souvent jouant leur propre rôle, ou des témoins que tu interviews chez eux ou dans la rue. Qu'est-ce que cette dimension humaine apporte à ton travail en particulier et à l'art en général? Je sais que c'est une question difficile. Enfin.
Well, I mean, not in this room, but a lot of time I work with people. I work with groups of people. I try to get them to do things that might seem a little unusual, like remake a battle from a trade union dispute, or to commemorate a battle in the First World War in a way of like a war memorial, effectively. But I've never had problems working with the public, and I work with musicians a lot. On the whole, the public in Britain, at least, are very open to working with artists. They like working with artists, I find. But I mean, I am interested in people. We are all interested in people, obviously. And so, for example, in the show Beaux-arts, there's a film about Brexit, and I interview a lot of people in that, some of whom have political opinions very, very different from mine, on the opposite spectrum. But in a sense, I'm interested. I get angry when I hear politicians say things, but when I hear people in the street say things that politicians say, in a way I'm more sympathetic maybe, but I'm interested in why they're saying it. Not what they're saying, but why. And in that film, I try to get a little bit into the mind of people I feel have been radicalized. So I'm interested in them. I don't want to argue with them. There's no point. There's no point arguing with these people because they are, in a way, on a different planet than I am, in a sense. That's how it feels. But I'm interested in them because they're from my country. They're my country people. They're my age. They're almost my demographic, in a way. And yet they think very differently, and that's very interesting to me. It's very frightening as well and upsetting, but maybe if you make art about it, you can you can understand it better. So people are always interesting, aren't they? You go to an art gallery, the most interesting thing in an art gallery are the people. Or go to a concert. I went to see Beyonce the other week, and the best thing about the concert was the audience, how they looked, how they dressed, how they behaved. The concert was kind of whatever in a way, but the audience were great, I felt. So that's where my interest lies. Not on stage, but like in the pit, as they say. Yeah.
Thank you. Encore une question avec les gens. Justement, dans certaines de tes œuvres, tu comptes aussi sur le public pour donner à ton travail une orientation à laquelle tu n'aurais peut-être pas pensé, comme par exemple dans la vidéo Beethoven, Wir haben die Schnauze voll, qui est présentée au musée. Pourquoi est-il, et je cite le titre d'un des chapitres de livre, pourquoi est-il temps de perdre le contrôle?
I think because if you work with the public, you work with the public, or you work outside, you lose control of your environment almost immediately. You cannot control the weather. No one can control the weather, really. And so you're at the mercy of people and the elements and accident and sort of chance. But you have to build that into work and make it part of it and make it interesting. I look to the public. When I make work, often I look to the public to improve on it, to make it better, to bring something I wasn't expecting. That's always the best thing when that happens, when people do things that you're not expecting. And you see it in the Orgreave film. There's a moment when someone starts talking and he gets into character and he's method acting himself. He's a former miner and he becomes his younger self and starts saying things as if he'd gone back 15 years and he was that person, that younger person again. So things like that really excite me when the public improve on something and take an idea and take it somewhere you're not expecting. Sometimes things can go wrong, but rarely does that happen, actually. And if it does, I tend to forget about it very quickly. I can't remember, but I try and, you have to have an element of trust, I think, which obviously some artists would find very, very difficult because they're sort of control freaks, but once something begins, once an artwork begins, a mass artwork with the public, there's nothing you can do. It just happens. It's like the sea going in and out or something, or you have no control over it. So often I would be happy not to see an artwork I make, a big artwork. I'd be happy to walk away from it because I know there's nothing I can do. And just to know it happened is best.
Tu parlais de la bataille d'Orgrave et parmi, donc là c'est un reenactment, mais il y a aussi plusieurs de tes œuvres qui ont à voir avec l'idée de commémoration, qui est une chose qui est très, très courante en fait, les commémorations notamment en Grande-Bretagne. Et tu as fait beaucoup d'œuvres autour de ça. Je me demandais ce qui t'intéressait dans cette notion de commémoration et comment tu la réinvestissais dans ton travail.
Well, commemoration is something that happens a lot in the UK. I don't know if it happens much in France, but in the UK, the media is almost obsessed with the 40th anniversary of this record, 20th anniversary of this record. It's everywhere through popular culture, and in a sense, I think it's a kind of a problem to keep going on about the past. But sometimes, if it's the 100th anniversary of the Battle of the Somme, for example, which of course the French were involved in 1916, then that seems to be an interesting time to think about something 100 years later. If only because there's no one left from the First World War in the UK, no soldiers left. And so that's a kind of an interesting moment to think about it. What does that mean? So I think you can make anniversaries are fine if you find the correct way to work with them. And reenactment also is a very good way to make memory click and to change memories and to spark new memories or ones that are asleep to make them wake up. In a way, the Battle of Orgreave was like that. It was trying to wake up a kind of a giant almost, or a monster, and make people think about it again when it rose up. And I'll try and work out what had happened to people 17 years previously, this massive trauma on the local people. So also a lot of times people think art is a way to make the world a better place, but sometimes it should make the world more complicated and make people more angry, not feel happy about themselves. And that work was definitely that.
And another question is, pour toi, et c'est pour rebondir aussi sur ce que tu viens de dire, l'art est-il nécessairement politique? C'est-à-dire que, on reparlait encore de la bataille d'Orgreave, tu dis que à l'époque c'était un cheval de Troie pour une performance artistique et politique, le travail que tu as fait là. Et alors, Jérémy, est-ce que toi, tu es un cheval de Troie de l'art artistique et politique dans un monde de l'art, dans le monde de l'art actuel, avec ses complexes composantes, mondialisation, marchandisation, etc., etc.
Yeah, that's a big question.
Yeah.
That's a bit unfair to ask me that question.
Sorry for that.
I think if everyone made political art, the world would be a very boring place, firstly. I don't make it. Not all my work is political, some is. I mean, you're in a room full of, I would say, very obviously political work. Some of it, not all of it, some of it. But I don't make it exclusively because I'd be so bored of doing that and kind of depressed as well. So I think you have to make work that has other elements to it. But if you're making work with human beings and making work about a situation today or something that's happening that isn't obviously political, it still has an element of politics within it, obviously. But I don't try and think about these big words too much about trying to define my work, because it's not for me to do that, but also I don't want to think about things too much. It's bad enough writing a book about it, I tell you. It's a bloody nightmare writing this book. It was, even though it might not seem to, when you read it, you might not sense my tears and blood that went into writing this, but it was a very difficult process trying to write about yourself. But I think that there's politics everywhere in my work. Here, this work here, Welcome to the Shit Show, it's big enough. You can all see this work, I know this. I made this as in 2019 at the Frieze Art Fair. They asked me, as they produce a magazine every day, and they asked me to make an artwork for the magazine. And I just thought, I'm going to make something that welcomes people to Britain. In October 2019, there's political chaos in Britain because of Boris Johnson was trying to stop Parliament working, literally. He tried to close Parliament for 6 weeks on some obscure technicality. And so it was chaos. And I just thought, well, what's my message to the world and to the people coming from all over the world to buy art is, welcome to this shit show. And I made it look like some cheap postcard you'd buy in Carnaby Street or Camden Market. But also, I wanted it to be at the airport. When you walk through departures at the airport of a Eurostar, you'd see welcome to the shit show. Not some terrible piece of public art. It would just be that, or an advert for Rolex watches. It would just be, say, watch out, you're in Britain now. And it continues. I don't know if you know about the news from the UK in the last 24 hours. There's more chaos has happened. So we call this an evergreen work. It just will live forever. It will be indestructible work for Britain, basically, because it just goes on, I think.
Okay. Almost my last question.
Uh-huh.
Après, ça sera à votre tour, parce que je suis sûre que vous en avez plein, mais j'en avais plein aussi. Let's speak about your book.
Okay.
Donc, Art is Magic, c'est le titre de l'exposition, et c'est aussi le titre de ton livre que tu as d'abord publié au printemps en Grande-Bretagne aux éditions Criée, et qu'on est très 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 content. Tu le sais, d'avoir eu la chance de pouvoir le publier en français dans la foulée. Ma question, c'est, ce livre, c'est écrit sur la couverture, is the best book, est le meilleur livre de Jérémy Deller.
C'est vrai.
Pourquoi?
Parce que most books I make books, but you'll never see them because they're art books and they just disappear or they end up in boxes or something. And I'm just sick of going into museum bookshops and looking at the D's. So it's like Degas, Delacroix, and then you think, right, okay, me next. And then it's like Delvaux, Duchamp, and it's like, I should be there. I need my Della between these artists. And so I've made a book which will hopefully be between Delacroix and Paul Delvaux, je pense, j'espère. So it's what's called a trade book, which means it actually gets distributed and it's a proper book, effectively, it's a real book. And we printed a lot, and so I have to sell a lot. And so on the front, I thought, what's the best way to publicize this book and to tell people how good it is? So I put the best book by Jérémy Deller on the front, just so people know that it is the best book by Jérémy Deller. So it's authoritative. It's not a sticker, it's actually printed. So that's why. It's marketing. It's very base, pathetic marketing, basically. Very crude.
Alors, ce que Jérémy ne dit pas non plus, c'est que I think that you spend a lot of time making this book, isn't it?
Oui.
And that almost everything has been written by you.
Oui, yeah, that's true. C'est vrai. It took about 2 years to write because I had to rewrite it about 7 times. To find a kind of correct tone, my voice. So I didn't sound pretentious or pompous or stupid or whatever. It's just, I wanted it to feel like this feels, or like if you sat next to me in a cafe or a pub. I wanted it to have that kind of intimacy. And also I wanted it to sort of explain, I had to explain myself to the public and make it a friendly book. So I think it's a friendly book. I could have put a friendly book by Jérémy Deller.
Pour la réédition, for the second edition, you can change or add something. My last question, it happened. Selon toi, Jérémy, en quoi l'art est magique? Why
Well, I mean, art it's magic in the sense that it's magical. That's the obvious term, but it's magic in that it can, in the way that magic can trick you, it can delight you, it can deceive you, it can make you wonder about reality because you don't understand what's happening. It can change the nature of reality. It can make you think about doubt things and so on. So I think it has that element of magic. It's a form of alchemy, all those things. So I think it's kind of, in a way, to me, it's obvious that art is a form of magic, or is magic. And so that's why I called it that. Also, I wanted to have the word art big on the cover. Again, this is marketing for you, just hints. I should run a course on this. And I wanted a positive word, because previously I had different titles for the book, which I put in my introduction, and they're all very negative and self-deprecatory and ironic, and I just thought, no, if you're printing 10,000 copies of a book, you need to be really positive and because you want people to buy it, rather than make people think this guy's a loser. Why am I buying his book? So that's why I did that.
Okay. So art is magic to be sold.
Oui.
Ok. C'est le temps. J'ai plus de questions.
Oui.
Ça va. C'est à vous maintenant de poser vos questions. Il y a un micro, il y a Norbert qui va passer avec le micro. Il vous suffit de lever la main comme ça et vous pourrez poser vos questions soit directement en anglais.
On peut parler en français. I can try to speak English, but I'm not sure that it will be wonderful. Je parle français. À un moment, tu dis que l'Angleterre, enfin que tu es anglais, et en fait, pour toi, ce qui domine dans la culture anglaise, c'est la musique. Et en fait, pour les Français, a priori, c'est la littérature. Enfin, il y a beaucoup de peuples étrangers qui disent que c'est la littérature, c'est à travers la littérature qu'on voit le peuple français. Et moi, je voudrais savoir comment tu considères justement les Français, et quel est ton regard sur le peuple français, et qu'est-ce que tu penses justement de notre manière de manifester, des gilets jaunes, de toutes ces manifestations autour des retraites, etc. Est-ce que toi, tu pourrais justement représenter en fait tout ce mouvement de manifestation? Est-ce que ça pourrait rentrer dans ton travail?
I know about the Yellow Vests is a big thing in Britain, and they're very well known in Britain. And the demonstrations in Paris, what was it, 5 or 6 years ago when they began, or 6? That was really made big news in Britain. When France riots, it's always big news in Britain. And I don't know whether it's because we think, look at them, that's really good or that's really terrible. You can't really tell. But some people in Britain say, we need to do this now because of our government. But it's different for us. I don't know quite how, but it probably won't happen. But we had Yellow Vests in the UK, but they were far right. The far right in the UK took up the kind of Yellow Vest look and wrote on the back of their vest and so on. But they were much more pro-Brexit and very far right, much more so than I think they were in France. But I think people in Britain still can't quite believe there's a country so close to us, but so different. And they sort of like that. Because when I come to Paris or come to France, it is just so different in so many ways, which I like, which is good. And I'm sure it's the same for you when you come to the UK. You think, what is this crazy place, basically? But I think, for me personally, I wouldn't maybe make work about French culture unless I really had a really good idea, because it's so specific. I would need to know a lot. But it does interest me, it absolutely interests me. And like I said, there's a lot of interest in the UK about what's going on in France with the pensions. Of course, our pensions are destroyed in Britain, so it's too late for us. But there might be other reasons for us to think about this kind of action. People have been talking about it for years and years. When Boris Johnson became Prime Minister, people expected something. And even around Brexit, there was no riots with people who didn't want Brexit. They were far too polite to riot. But it was nasty, the discussion, but it was never really violent. There were some very specific elements of violence around Brexit, very specific, almost terrorist events, but nothing mass. There's no mass movement. But I don't think there's the time here to work out why that is in Britain, why it's so different.
Jeremy, I have a silly question and a serious question.
Do you want to speak in French so people can understand?
Do I have to say it in French?
Are you English?
I am English.
Okay, we'll speak in English then, yeah. Yeah.
Art is magic. Paul Daniels, is there a link there? I'm just seeing Paul Daniels, is there a link there? That's a silly question. Yeah. And then there's a serious question.
Right.
I'm really curious about the fact that you did art history, and you turned into an artist. So was there a moment in that kind of like story which said, "Ooh, I want to suddenly become an artist"?
Okay, I'll do the easy question first. This guy up here with the pentagram, he's like a kitsch TV magician in Britain. And when I did a show called English Magic, I made this poster of him summoning up a pentagram for black magic because he was the most family-friendly, jokey, comedian magician, basically. But he was a very good magician. But there I have him like summoning up the dark arts to create some like horrendous sort of ritual or something like that. So it's just funny. No one else will get this apart from an English person, so well spotted. In terms of art history, I think, I love artists, I love art history, and I've obviously studied it for 3 years, but I realized after I left the institution I was at, the educational institution, that I wasn't equipped, let me put it like that, to be in an office and work with other people, because actually if you work in a museum, you don't get to see much art. You're in an office, and I couldn't handle that, and I didn't want to be in an auction house and so on. So it occurred to me that I wasn't suited for that life quite quickly. And I'd had other experiences around artists which made me think that looks more exciting to me, more vital. And, I was studying Baroque drawings for a year almost, that's how it felt. And it's a very, very small world, and I wanted to be out in the world itself, not looking at drawings that were made 600 years ago, much that I love them. I want to look at them, but I don't want to study them and write about them necessarily. So that's why. It's not a loss to art history, believe me, that I didn't do it. It was good. I mean, I can tell this story. I worked in an art gallery for a while, a commercial art gallery. On the first morning, I was given a job. My first job was to take a sticker off the back of a David Hockney print that had come from an auction house. And I took it off. I was given this thing, looked like a hairdryer, to take it off. It was actually a paint stripper. I didn't know this. And I burnt the print. I basically destroyed it. That was literally the first job I had on my first day at work. And I hid it and didn't tell anyone. And no one found out. So there's some lesson to be learned there. But I'm not very good at sort of practical things. And so I had to find my way, effectively. It took some time.
Bonjour, et moi je voulais savoir si vous aviez aussi étudié ou lu l'anthropologie, parce que comme vous avez ouvert la discussion sur la relation aux cultures populaires, je trouve que votre travail et vos productions ont un grand écho avec le travail des anthropologues, des ethnographes aussi. Voilà, je ne sais pas si ça vous parle.
No, I haven't. That's the quick answer. I know about it. I know anthropologists, but I don't. I mean, anthropology you usually do in a distant country. I'm not all the time. You go elsewhere to do it. I just do it within my own country. I don't even know if that's ethical or not. I don't even know if anthropology is ethical anymore, frankly. But I just do that. Maybe it's a form of anthropology on my own people, if I can put it in those terms. But I'm aware of it, but I've never studied it. I don't know any of the theory around it, but I'm not an expert, no.
Bonjour. Bonjour. Alors moi, c'est un peu aussi pour rebondir par rapport à la question sur l'anthropologie, etc. C'est que vous faites quand même pas mal le tour de l'Angleterre et peut-être du Royaume-Uni. Et comment vous venez à rencontrer toutes ces contre-cultures, ces cultures différentes, cette cartographie, vous allez voir des choses hyper localisées, vernaculaires et des choses beaucoup plus populaires qui peut-être peuvent être connues de tous les Britanniques ou quoi. Comment vous faites pour approcher, pour sélectionner? Enfin, c'est quoi votre méthodologie de travail par rapport à ça? J'espère que la question n'est pas trop compliquée.
Well, there's no set way. There's no plan. There's never a plan, and there's never a checklist. It's just what interests you. I think it's an instinctive way of working. I think that's the easiest way of putting it. I think I mentioned until quite recently, folk art was seen in Britain as like a below contempt almost by the arts establishment. It's very different now, but so when we made the folk art exhibition, we were massively criticised by the press. They were very unhappy with what we did. That's not really answering your question, but really, I think when I made the folk art show with Alan, who was my collaborator, then we really instinctively knew what each other liked. And it was almost like a Venn diagram. It was almost 100% the same, maybe 95%. He didn't want to have material about the royal family, and because he didn't like the royal family, but I thought it was an important part of British identity. But on the whole, we were very, very together in what we were choosing. And yeah, the mix between pop and folk, I don't know where it is, but of course there is a combination of it. There was a connection, but we weren't looking to define things, never looking to define things. If anything, we're trying to expand the definition and make it much more messy, I think is the word.
Il n'y a plus de questions?
Oh, there's one more. Maybe this.
Bonjour. Merci beaucoup pour cet incroyable travail. Merci à tous les commissaires et à vous. Enfin, c'est vraiment formidable de pouvoir avoir toutes ces œuvres réunies. Donc, vous travaillez beaucoup avec des personnes, aussi dans l'espace public et dans une logique de perte de contrôle aussi, ou en tout cas de diminuer peut-être votre contrôle sur les choses. Vous n'avez jamais été tenté par le fait aussi de travailler collectivement et peut-être de co-créer des œuvres ou de disparaître derrière un nom collectif?
I've worked in collaboration with artists, not as a collective, but definitely in collaboration with artists, with a choreographer sometimes, and musicians, and so there is, but not with like a collective like 8 artists or something like this. I think that kind of activity often springs from art college. I think if you went to art college, you stay with your cohort, your peers, and you make work as a group together often. But I didn't go to art college, so I don't really have those very strong connections to artists in the way that you might do if you went to art college. But I like collaborating often, but not as a collective. A collective is more than one other person, really, isn't it? It's like, I don't know how many. I don't know what the definition of a collective is, but it's more than one person, I'm sure. But I'm trying to be open, so maybe one day I would.
On peut prendre une dernière question avant que Jérémy signe les livres que vous pouvez, qui seront en vente donc, dans l'espace librairie.
Moi, j'étais surprise en fait de voir que vous citiez Jacques Attali, étant donné tout le boulot que vous avez fait sur cette culture, sur les luttes, etc. Moi, j'ai fait la quête quand j'étais gamine pour les mineurs anglais, et on voyait bien que Thatcher, elle était allée voir Pinochet au Chili. Enfin, bref, et que nous, maintenant, cette expérience, elle arrive chez nous en France, en Europe, avec la troisième voie, etc. Donc, à Jacques Attali, pour moi, ça me paraît décalé, mais c'est peut-être parce que vous ne connaissez pas ce que représente Jacques Attali en France.
Clearly not. I just like those 3 words. Music is prophecy. Was he a bad person or something? I don't know. I don't know Jacques Attali. I've never met him. And if he is a bad person, I'm very sorry for using him. But he did come up with a very good phrase. But I think I read a book he wrote about war and music, or something like that. or try to. I'm not a theory person. I find it very, very difficult. Maybe that's what makes me English and not French. Is I find theory incredibly complicated and I get confused. But those 3 words jumped out, so that's why. But if he's a bad person, then I'm sorry. I didn't know that, and my mistake. Thank you. That's the end, is it? I'm going to sign books if you want to. Let's do some book signing. Thank you.